How y'all doing? For this review, I'm going to cover a book I bought at the used bookstore here in town. It's not a big series. It seems like a good one-off. And little did I know when I got it, it's actually based on a piece of British folklore and fairy tale there. It is Thomas the Rhymer by Ellen Kushner. Now, this has, something that catches your eye. It's got a good cover by Thomas Canty, who I have on several of the covers of my books, particularly the Michael Moorcock Eternal Champion series by White Wolf. Many of the covers were done by this person right here. When I read the back, I was fascinated to it because, it's about a bard who was, abducted by the Queen of Elfland to serve her for a certain number of years. So I got this and I set it aside till I got around reading it. This was last year. Now, at the beginning of this year, which was starting from the end of January to May, I was reading the 21-volume set of the Enchanted World series by Time Life Books. I covered those several years ago, where I just showed off the books. I have a playlist on that. If you look into that, many of you already know it. But here's the thing: I never sat down and read it cover to cover. For years, as a kid, up until this year, I would just look at the pictures of it and read the little short sections of it. But I decided this year to read them all. And when I got to Fairies and Elves, there is a segment talking about Thomas the Rhymer, because it's based on an actual fairy tale from Great Britain. Now, many of you may not be familiar with it. I'll give you the short run of it. Thomas the Rhymer was a talented bard who one day in the forest by the idol tree, a beautiful woman on a horse comes by and abducts him. He's been gone for 7 years. Apparently, the story goes he lives in the Queen of Elfland's realm for that time, and he comes back with with several abilities that will make him success for the rest of his life. He will become a magnificent bard, famous throughout the land. He will be, he can foresee the future, so he's been sought after as a soothsayer. And he cannot tell lies. That's where he gains one of his nicknames, True Thomas. So this book right here tells the same story, but unlike in the Enchanted World, where it just tells in the third person, a quick telling of the story, like you're told, like the Three Billy Goats Gruff or something like that, this is told through point of view characters, and let's look into it and see what it's like. So the book is set up in 4 parts. Each part is focused on a point of view character, similar to George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series. In part 1 is Gavin. Gavin is a man who's married to Meg. They're both, serfs, peasants, however you want to call it. They live out in the country, just farming, trying to eat whatever living they can. On a cold, wet night, a man comes in seeking shelter. This is Thomas. Through hospitality, they let him in, give him something to eat. They let him warm by the fire. He gets a little ill, so he stays for a while until he recovers. And they find out that he's a bard. He just got from one court here, and he's trying to go seek whatever means he can through living as a bard. And he stays a while, helps out a little bit, but mostly he tries to woo the local farm girl here who helps him out, Elspeth, who doesn't give in to his charm so easily. Very resistant in a nice way. Thomas is a very handsome man and very talented in his craft. But one day, he goes out in the forest somewhere, and he's never seen again. This is where we get to part 2, simply called Thomas, because we're going to learn from his perspective what has happened to him. He was out in the forest by the Eldon tree, however it's pronounced. A beautiful woman on a horse with silver bells on it comes to him. And she tells him that she is the Queen of Elfland. She knows of him, and he's getting a little notoriety, in his world. She's offering to take him to her world to serve as her bard and as her lover. There's a few caveats, though. He cannot eat the food there, and this is classic, dealings with the people of Elfland. You can't eat the food there or else you're stuck there forever. So she has to bring in food from his world for him to eat. He cannot speak to anyone other than her, when they're alone. He can sing during the banquets and stuff like that, but he has to remain silent throughout the entire time. And so, and with that, he basically becomes the bard with benefits for the Queen of Elfland. They become lovers. So she takes him to her castle and all that. He meets all the wondrous enchanted creatures of fairy of various kinds. But he also comes across her brother, and it's just simply called Hunter. because names are important here, you know. And so Hunter is, you know, kind of, you know, close thing to an adversary that Thomas has. And one of the things that he does is presents Thomas with a riddle for him to solve. Now, Thomas is contracted, so to say, to stay with the Queen of Elfland as her bard and lover for 7 years. Now, remember, time is different in, you know, in the realm of fairy compared, you know, when compared to our world. So when Thomas comes back, 7 years has passed. But in the realm of fairy, time runs a very interesting show, where, you know, he's at this first banquet where he performs, and he doesn't realize that, you know, he performs for a while. They all, you know, all applaud him in their own way, and eventually gets tired. And the queen's like, "Oh, let's let him, you know, let him be. You know, he's not used to our time." So he just figures, okay, it was a long night. He goes to bed. He wakes up to her, and she tells him that it's been several days, you know, from that time. Just that's kind of the way how time is shortened by then. So 7 years in the Elfland doesn't seem to pass that, you know, that long at all. But eventually he has to come back. 7 years does come pass, and after he solves the issue there with her brother and all that, she takes him back, and before Thomas comes back to our world, she gives him an apple. Normally he's not allowed to eat from Jerome Fairley, but this apple's going to be different. And in so doing, he cannot tell a lie. He will become a good bard, and, you know, he will be able to see into people's futures. Now, you would have figured the lying part would come in, you know, as a very big disadvantage, but he learns to live with that, and that's when we get to the next part. Part 3 is Meg, which is Gavin's wife from Part 1. Now we're talking to her point of view. This is a short section where Thomas comes back in flamboyant clothing, you know, very rich clothes. So, but, you know, he has to adjust to his new abilities and adjust the fact that he's been 7 years. The girl he's been trying to woo, Elsbeth, has tried to move on. It's, you know, she's not going to wait 7 years for him, especially all of a sudden. So she got married and became widowed. So there's, you know, trying to reconcile that. And when they try to ask him where he's been, he tells them he's been with the Queen of Elfland in the Land of Fairy. They don't believe him, even though he cannot tell a lie at this point. So there's a bit of a struggle there. But all said and done, he eventually, you know, he figures, let's just, you know, he goes to be a bard, earn his fortune, and hopefully he can win back Elsbeth. The last part, part 4, is of Elsbeth, which is from her perspective. She is the girl that Thomas is trying to woo, and eventually they do get married. They have a kid. You know, he becomes famous throughout the land for not only his bard work, but also because of his soothsaying abilities. You know, he's known for not telling a lie. So we're getting her perspective of the years they spent together. This is shortened, of course. So, you know, how she lives with it. And apparently there was a small something of his past before he was abducted to Elfland that was almost scandalous, you know, within the court. So there's that issue to solve, and you get to understand what happens, you know, to Thomas at the end. Now, I enjoyed this as something that, you know, is a good classic fairy tale told through a different, you know, the 4 point of view character perspective, and it's not that long. This is only about, what, 250 pages. Yeah, about 247. And if you're looking for a classic fairy tale that's not romantasy, doesn't have explicit sex, but it talks about, you know, the love, falling in love. In this case, Thomas fell in love with the Queen of Elfland, and, you know, how that can't really last, and how he deals with his wife. It explores to some degree of that, but it's not the main focus. Now, this is probably a good book for those who do role-playing games, particularly at bards. This is a good inspiration on how you can have a bard character. You know, what kind of dynamics you can have for this. What if you character can't tell a lie? How would that interact with diplomacy and things like that? You know, it's just, I think something like this should be known about. It's a one-off story. It's not a series. It's written well. You know, it's not sword and sorcery, you know, where it has to be a big, violent adventure and all that. It's a nice, simple fairy tale, something that is derived from fairy tale folklore of Britain, just told in a nice little modern way that anyone could enjoy. So, what can I say? I picked it up. It was as it said it was. And I think if you want to go traditional fairy tales and a nice little romance with that, get yourself this. Thomas the Rhymer. Sorry, it's hard for me to say that. Thomas the Rhymer by Ellen Kushner. Thank you all for watching. Have a nice day.